The forge of Caedmon Hollow had not seen a king in 11 generations. Ivenna Thrace knelt in the soot beside her father's anvil, her calloused hands pressed flat against the cold iron, and listened to the sound of horses she should not have been hearing. 12 riders, maybe 14. Their hooves struck the frozen road in a rhythm too disciplined for traders, too quiet for soldiers passing through. Royal escort. She did not move, did not breathe. The fire in the great hearth had burned low through the night, and the gray dawn light that filtered through the soot-blackened windows fell on the thing she had been working on in secret for 27 days. A sword, but not just any sword. It lay across the cooling rack in 2 pieces, the way it had arrived in the dead of an autumn night, wrapped in oilcloth and delivered by a hooded courier who had spoken only 6 words before vanishing into the dark. The king cannot know it broke. Ivenna had known, the moment she peeled back the cloth, exactly what she was looking at. Every smith in the 7 Valleys knew. The blade was older than the kingdom itself, forged in the first age when the wolf-blooded had walked with gods, its dark steel etched with runes that shifted when the moon was full. It was called Vil-Korath in the old tongue, the sundered oath, the blade of the Alpha King. And it had snapped clean across the fuller, 3 fingers above the hilt. A blade like that did not break. A blade like that could not break. Unless something far worse than war had struck it. For 27 days she had worked on it alone, hiding it beneath a false floor when villagers came to commission horseshoes and plow blades. For 27 nights she had stayed awake with her hands pressed to the broken steel, listening, because that was what her grandmother had taught her. The blades remember, Ivenna. If you are quiet enough, they will tell you who broke them. And this one had whispered. She had not slept properly since. The hooves stopped outside her gate. Ivenna rose slowly, brushing the soot from her leather apron, her dark braid swinging heavy over her shoulder. She was 23 years old, taller than most of the men in the village, and her eyes were the strange pale gray of river stones. Eyes her mother had once told her came from a bloodline that should have stayed buried. She crossed the forge floor and reached for the iron tongs, not because she meant to fight, but because her hands needed something to hold. The door opened without a knock. 3 men stepped into her forge, their cloaks frosted with the morning's first snow. 2 wore the black leather and silver wolf clasps of the royal guard. The third was different. He was tall enough that he had to tilt his head to fit beneath the rafters. His shoulders filled the doorway. His hair was the color of wet ash, cropped close at the sides and longer on top, and a scar ran from the corner of his left eye down to his jaw. He did not wear a crown. He did not need to. She had never seen him before in her life. She had also dreamed of him every night for the past 27 days. His eyes, and God's help her, his eyes were the color of molten copper, ringed with the faintest threading of black. Found hers across the forge floor, and Ivenna felt something inside her chest turn over. She forgot the tongs in her hand. He took 1 step forward. The floorboards groaned beneath his weight. "You are the smith's daughter," he said. His voice was low, rough at the edges, like a stone dragged across slate. Ivenna of House Thrace. She did not curtsy. She did not know how. "I am the smith. My father is dead these 4 years." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not surprise, recognition. "Then it is you who has been keeping my sword." The words landed in the silent forge like a hammer striking the anvil. Ivenna's hand tightened on the tongs. Behind her, beneath the false floor, Vil-Korath lay in 2 pieces, and she had not yet decided whether she would tell him the truth, that she had not been keeping the sword. She had been finishing it. And the rune at the break point, the rune the courier had not seen, the rune no living smith was supposed to know, had begun 3 nights ago to glow with a soft and terrible blue. She lifted her chin. "Your Majesty," she said, "I think you had better close the door." He did not close the door. He nodded once, and the two guards stepped back into the snow and pulled it shut behind them. And then it was only the king and Ivenna and a fire that had begun, without her tending it, to burn higher in the hearth. Ivenna had heard stories all her life about Corin Verilis, the Alpha King of the Northern Crown. The wolf who had taken the throne at 19 after his father was murdered in his own bedchamber. The warrior who had crushed 3 border rebellions before he was 25. The unmarried king whose council was tearing itself apart over which noble daughter would finally share his bed. The stories had not prepared her for the way he looked at her. He crossed the forge slowly, and with each step the air seemed to thicken, charged in a way she could not name, the way the sky tasted before lightning. He stopped 2 paces from her, close enough that she could see the small scar through his eyebrow, close enough that she could smell snow and cedar and something underneath it, something warm and wild and unsettling. "You have been working on it," he said, not a question. "Show me." Her hands moved before her mind agreed. She knelt and lifted the false floorboard. The oilcloth bundle waited beneath, exactly where she had left it. She brought it to the workbench and unwrapped it with the care of a woman handling a sleeping child. The 2 halves of Vale Korath gleamed dark in the firelight. Corin made a sound she did not recognize, half a breath, half something deeper. A sound that was not entirely human. His hand hovered above the blade and did not touch it. 27 days, he murmured, and the rune has woken. She froze. He saw the freeze, and his copper eyes lifted to hers, and something in them sharpened. "You did not know what you were doing," he said quietly. "Did you, Smith?" "I knew what I was doing." "No." His voice was almost gentle now. It was somehow worse than anger. "You knew the steel. You did not know the rune. The rune is mine to know. The rune is the king's to know, and the smith who carries the bloodline of the first forge. And there has not been such a smith for 11 generations, Ivenna Thrace." The tongs slipped from her hand and struck the floor. The sound rang through the forge like a struck bell. He stepped closer. She could not step back. The workbench was behind her. His hand rose and stopped a hair's breadth from her cheek, hovering, as though he were afraid that touching her would wake something neither of them could put back to sleep. "Do you know what you are?" he whispered. She did not, and she did. And the not knowing and the knowing were both the same shape inside her, and she had been carrying it her whole life. His hand fell away before it touched her. "Pack what you can carry," he said, and his voice had hardened into something else now, a king's voice, weighted with command. "You ride to Caer Vilmoran with me before nightfall." The ground tilted beneath her. "No." "Ivenna?" "No." The word tore out of her, and with it came every fear she had buried beneath the false floor along with his sword. "I have a forge. I have a home. I have a village that depends on me for their tools and their nails and their— I am not yours to summon, your majesty. I do not care what bloodline you think you have found, I am not going." His jaw tightened. For one suspended moment she thought he might argue. Beg. Explain. Instead, he turned away from her and crossed to the door and opened it, and Ivenna felt the cold air rush in around her ankles and thought, "Thank the gods. He is leaving." He was not leaving. "Captain Balesh," he said, calm as still water. "Take the smith and her tools. Take the sword, burn the forge." "What?" She lunged toward him. The captain caught her around the waist before she had crossed 3 feet of floor, and she fought him. She fought him with all the strength of a woman who had hammered iron for 16 years. But he was wolf-blooded and she was not, and he held her as easily as a child holds a sparrow. "Corin!" she screamed. The use of his name, his given name, stopped him in the doorway. He did not turn. "You have no right." "I have every right." His voice did not lift. He did not look back at her. "You are the last living smith of the first forge. My sword is broken, and I will not lose you to a winter night and a village that does not know what it has. This is my home." It was. He stepped out into the snow. The captain dragged her after him. Over her shoulder, as they pulled her through the door, she saw the second guard already touching a torch to the rafters. The straw caught instantly. The fire climbed the wall in the shape of a hand. By the time they had lifted her onto a horse, the forge of Caedmon Hollow was a column of black smoke against the morning sky, and Ivenna Thrace had begun to understand, with a cold and terrible clarity, that the man she had dreamed of for 27 nights had just stolen her life. She did not cry. She stared at his back, 3 horses ahead of her on the road, and made a single silent promise to herself. I will leave that castle. I do not care how high the walls. I do not care how many men he sets to watch me. I will leave. She did not know then that the Alpha King had already given the only order that mattered. She does not leave the castle, not for any reason, not by any door, not even if she begs. They reached Caer Velmorin at the 3rd bell of the 2nd night. Ivenna had not spoken in 19 hours. She had not eaten. She had not looked at the king once, and he had not looked at her. And the silence between them had grown into a third presence on the road, heavier than the cold, heavier than the smoke that still clung to her hair. The castle rose out of the mist like a thing the mountain had grown rather than something built. Its towers were black stone veined with silver. Its gates were forged of a dark metal she had never seen in any catalogue her father had owned. As they passed beneath the great arch, she felt the metal hum against her skin, felt it the way a tuning fork feels another tuning fork struck across the room. And she understood, with the small cold part of her mind that was still working, that the gates of Caer Velmorin had been forged by her bloodline, long ago, before the 11 generations of forgetting. Servants came running with lanterns. The captain lifted her down from the horse without a word, and the king dismounted 10 paces away and walked into his own castle without looking at her. She was led through corridors she did not see. Upstairs she did not count. A door opened, and a chamber waited for her. Fire already lit, basin of warm water already steaming, bed turned down with linen softer than anything she had ever owned. A woman in a gray dress curtsied. "My lady, I am Mistress Pell. I will see to whatever you need." "My freedom," Ivenna said. The woman's face did not change, but her eyes held something that looked, for one strange moment, like grief. "Anything but that, my lady." The door closed behind her. Ivenna heard the lock turn. She crossed to the window. The drop below the sill was 40 feet onto stone. The window itself was barred with the same dark metal that hummed in the gates. When she pressed her palm against it, the metal warmed beneath her touch, recognized her, and held. Her own blood, locking her in. She sank slowly to the floor beneath the window with her back against the cold wall, and only then, only when there was no one to see her, did she allow her face to crumple. She cried for the forge, for her father's anvil, 23 years old when she was born, melting now in the embers of her home, for the village that would wake to ash, for the small life she had built with her 2 hands, a life that had been hers and only hers, taken from her between one breath and the next by a man who had not even raised his voice. She did not cry for long. When the tears stopped, she rose. She washed her face. She braided her hair with hands that had stopped shaking, and she walked to the door and pressed her ear against the wood and listened. She had been a smith for 16 years. She knew how locks were made. She knew how hinges failed. She knew, better than any noble lady in this castle would ever know, the secret weaknesses of every bar of iron between her and the open sky. "I will leave." She crossed to the small writing desk by the fire and sat down, and on a sheet of cream-colored parchment that did not belong to her, she began, by the light of a fire she had not lit, to draw a map, from memory, of every corridor she had been led through, of every door, of every stair. Outside her window, in the courtyard 4 floors below, a wolf was howling. It was a long sound, ragged at the edges, The kind of sound a creature makes when it has been holding something in for a very long time. Ivenna did not know, could not yet know, that the wolf in the courtyard was the king himself, and that he had not slept for any of the 27 nights she had spent listening to his sword, and that the order he had given his guards had not, in truth, been "do not let her leave." The order he had given his guards, in a voice none of them had ever heard him use before, had been 3 words only: "Do not lose her." And in the highest tower of Caer Velmaran, in a room lined with mirrors that should not have been there, a woman with hair the color of dried blood was looking down into the courtyard at the howling wolf, and she was smiling. She had waited a very long time for the smith to come home. 41 days. Ivenna counted them on the inside of her wardrobe door, scratched into the wood with the bent end of a hairpin she had stolen from Mistress Pell's apron on the 3rd morning. Each scratch was no longer than a fingernail. Each one was a promise. 41 days, and she had not once been permitted past the 2nd landing. The castle had given her everything she did not want: a wardrobe of dresses and silks she could not name, a standing tray of food that arrived 3 times a day whether she ate it or not, a small library of books on metallurgy and runecraft that someone had clearly chosen for her with care. Mistress Pell brought her hot water in the morning and warm milk at night, and asked her each evening in the same gentle voice if she required anything else. "My lady." Ivenna had stopped answering after the 1st week. She had, however, stopped trying to escape after the 2nd. Not because she had given up, because she had learned. The dark metal in the window bars warmed when she touched it. The dark metal in the door hinges did the same. The hum she had felt in the gates on the night of her arrival was woven, she now understood, into every stone of Caer Velmaran, into the mortar itself, in veins so fine she would never have seen them if her hands had not begun, around the 9th day, to tingle whenever she walked too close to a wall. The castle knew her blood. The castle was built of her blood, and she could not break out of a thing her own ancestors had locked. So she had begun, instead, to listen. She listened to the footsteps in the corridor, to the bells from the courtyard, to the way the servants spoke in lowered voices when they thought she was reading, and the way they fell silent whenever a particular name was mentioned. A name she had not yet caught, only the shape of it, 2 soft syllables that the staff of Caer Velmaran said the way villagers spoke of disease. She had not seen the king once since he had walked away from her in the entrance hall. Not once. 41 days, and the man who had burned her forge had not so much as opened her door. It was on the morning of the 42nd day that her tray arrived with something new on it, a folded scrap of parchment, tucked beneath the bread. Ivenna set down her cup. She glanced at the door. She slid the parchment into her sleeve, and only when she had retreated to the window seat with her back to the room did she unfold it. 3 words, in a hand she did not know. "The blade is moving." She read it twice, 3 times. The bread on the tray went cold. The blade was moving. She had left Vial Carath on her workbench in 2 pieces. The king had taken it from her forge wrapped in oilcloth, and she did not know what had been done with it since. She had assumed he had locked it away in some vault, the way kings locked away the things they could not yet understand. But blades did not move on their own, unless someone was finishing the work she had started. Ivenna folded the parchment small enough to hide in her palm, and she rose, and for the first time in 41 days she crossed to the door and knocked on it from the inside. The bolt drew back almost at once, Mistress Pell's face, tight with surprise. "My lady, I want to see the king." The older woman did not move, did not blink, did not, Ivenna noticed, look surprised so much as braced. "That is not a thing," Mistress Pell said carefully, "that I am permitted to grant." "Then who is?" "My lady, please." "Who is permitted, Mistress Pell? Tell me his name." The woman's mouth opened, closed, and then, slowly, carefully, like someone passing a live coal hand to hand, she said, The Lady Marith would speak with you, if you are ready to be spoken to. It was the second time Ivenna had heard a name said in that particular tone. It was the first time anyone had said it to her face. She made herself smile. It was not a real smile. It was the one her father had taught her to use with men who came to the forge meaning to cheat her on a price. Then take me to her. Mistress Pell led her up. Not down, which was where Ivenna had assumed the audience chambers would be, but up, through a stair she had not known existed, behind a tapestry in a corridor she had walked past 40 times. The stair was narrow, the walls were close, the air grew thinner with each turn, and colder, and the dark metal hum she had grown so used to begin around the 5th landing to change, to thin out, to falter, as though the ancient veins of her bloodline did not quite reach this far up. They climbed for a long time. When the stair finally ended at a door of pale wood, in a castle of black stone, Mistress Pell stopped and turned. "My lady," she said, very quietly, "may I give you a piece of advice that will cost me my position if it is repeated? Speak. Do not let her touch your hands." The older woman did not wait for a response. She knocked once. The door opened of its own accord. The room beyond was lined floor to ceiling with mirrors. Ivenna stepped inside and felt, for one disoriented moment, that she had walked into the inside of a jewel. Every wall threw back her reflection. The fire in the hearth was reflected 100 times, each one slightly out of step with the others, as though the flames in some of the mirrors were burning in a slightly different draft than the flames in the room itself. A woman stood by the window with her back to the door. Her hair was the color of dried blood. It fell to the small of her back, unbraided, and when she turned, Ivenna saw a face that should have been beautiful. High cheekbones, a long pale throat, eyes the green of old bottle glass, and that was, instead, almost beautiful, in the way a wax figure is, almost a person. "Ivenna of House Thrace," the woman said. Her voice was warm, her smile was warm, nothing about her was warm. "How thoughtful of you to come visit at last. I had begun to think you did not care for company. You sent the parchment. I sent a great many things." The woman crossed the room in a slow, gliding step that did not quite seem to disturb the rugs. "I would offer you wine, but I think you have not come for wine." "I would take an explanation." "Of course you would. You are a smith. Smiths are creatures of cause and effect. Strike here. The metal answers there. It is an admirable way to move through the world." She stopped 3 paces from Ivenna and tilted her head. "I am Marith Verilis, Corin's aunt, by the long way of it. I have been the chatelaine of Caer Velmaran for 31 years. I have served 3 kings. I am, you might say, the memory of this house." Ivenna kept her hands at her sides. "Do not let her touch your hands." "You said the blade is moving." "I said the blade is moving," Marith corrected, and the warmth in her voice did not change, but something behind it did. Something that flickered, the way the fire flickered in the wrong mirrors. "The 2 halves you left on your workbench are no longer in 2 halves, dear Smith. Someone has been welding them. Crudely. With a heat too low for the rune to seat. A butcher's job, but a job nonetheless. And the rune at the break has gone dark." Ivenna's breath stopped. The rune. The blue rune. The one she had woken with 27 nights of listening. A dark rune was not a sleeping rune. A dark rune was a killed rune. And a killed rune in the sundered oath meant, "He cannot wield it," she whispered. "He cannot wield it," Marith agreed. "Not in the next moon, not in the moon after. Not, perhaps, ever again. The king's blade is now, for all the purposes that matter to a kingdom under siege, a piece of broken jewelry. And you, dear girl, are the only living hand in 7 valleys that can wake the rune again." She stepped closer. Closer than Ivenna liked. Close enough that Ivenna could see, in the ring of mirrors behind the woman's head, that one of the reflections, only one, was not smiling. "He has been a fool," Marith said gently. "He has kept you locked in a tower like a bird he meant to admire later. He has not told you the truth. He has let his sword be ruined in his own armory, under his own seal, and he has not yet realized that someone in his own household has been ruining it on purpose." Ivena's pulse had begun to thud in her ears. "Who?" "Ah." Marith smiled the wax figure smile. "That is the question for which a clever smith trades favors. I will give you this much, free of charge, because I have always pitied women in cages." Her hand rose. Ivena remembered, just in time, and stepped back. The hand fell, slowly, the way a falling thing falls in deep water. "The man who burned your forge did not give the order to burn it. The man who gave that order is dining tonight at the king's right hand." The world tipped. "That is a lie." "Is it?" Marith's eyes were perfectly steady. "Then ask him, dear. Ask the king himself. Ask him who first told him about the smith of Caedmon Hollow. Ask him whose hand wrote the warrant for your forge. And when the answer has hollowed you out the way I think it will, come back to me, and we will discuss what a wise smith does with such information." She turned away. The audience was over. Ivena walked out of the mirror room with her hands shaking inside her sleeves. Behind her, in a mirror she did not turn to look at, one of the 100 reflections of Lady Marith Verilis lifted its head. Only that one, only that single false reflection, and watched her go, and the smile on its face was no longer warm at all. She did not sleep that night. She paced the length of her chamber from the window to the door and back, 27 times, 30, 50, until the rug beneath her feet began to take on the faint heat of her bloodline, waking in the threads of it. The dark metal hum in the bars at her window pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The fire in the hearth burned a color it should not have burned, too white, too clean. The castle was reacting to her. She did not know yet what that meant, but she knew, by the third bell after midnight, what she was going to do. When Mistress Pell came in the morning with the breakfast tray, Ivena was already dressed. Not in the silks the wardrobe had given her. In the plainest gown she could find, gray wool, no embroidery, the kind of dress a woman wore to do honest work. Her hair was braided in a single thick plait down her back. Her hands were scrubbed raw at the knuckles. "My lady?" Mistress Pell said, and her eyes flickered to the dress, and something in her face softened in a way Ivena did not understand. "I want to see the king," Ivena said. "I do not want to ask. I want to see him. Today. This morning. Before the sun is over the eastern wall." Mistress Pell set down the tray. She looked at Ivena for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Come with me, my lady. He has been waiting for you to ask." The corridors that morning were different. Ivena did not understand it at first. Then she did. The servants she passed did not lower their eyes. They lifted them. They looked at her openly, the way travelers look at the first roof after a long road. A young page actually stopped walking and stared. An older woman with a basket of linens pressed her hand to her mouth and did not move until Ivena had passed. She had been in this castle for 42 days, and not one of these people had looked her in the face before. Mistress Pell led her down a corridor she had never seen, through a door she had never been near, and into a chamber that smelled of wood smoke and steel polish, and a faint, clean scent she could not place. A scent that lived in the back of her throat the moment she breathed it in, that settled somewhere behind her sternum, and made her hand go to her chest without her permission. Cedar, snow, and underneath it, the king was sitting at a long oak table with a map spread across it. He looked up. He had not slept either. She saw it at once. The shadows under his copper eyes were the color of old bruises. His jaw was rougher than she remembered. He was wearing a plain, dark shirt, the sleeves shoved to his elbows, and on the table next to his right hand sat a wooden box, long, narrow, banded with the same dark metal as the gates, the box that held his sword. He stood up when he saw her, slowly, like a man rising in church. Ivenna. She did not let him speak again. Who burned my forge? The room went very still. He did not pretend not to understand. He did not look at Mistress Pell. He did not look away from Ivenna's face, even though something behind his eyes flinched the way a struck animal flinches. I gave the order, he said. That is not what I asked you. Then he said, Captain Balesh lit the torch. I gave the order. The warrant. The warrant that said the smith of Caedmon Hollow was to be brought to Caer Velmoran with all her tools and the work upon her bench, was written by my hand and sealed with my seal. And who? Ivenna said, and her voice had gone very quiet, very level. Told you about me. His copper eyes held hers. For 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. He did not answer. And then he said in a voice that was no longer a king's voice, and was instead the voice of a man who had perhaps been waiting 42 days to be asked this question. My aunt, Lady Marith, she came to me on the night your sword broke, and told me there was a smith in Caedmon Hollow with the old blood in her hands, and that if I did not bring her to the castle before the next moon, I would lose the kingdom. The floor seemed to drop a 1/4 inch beneath Ivenna's feet. She told you, she whispered. Ivenna. She told you. About me, about the forge, about the bloodline. Yes. And the sword. He did not answer. Corin. She took 1 step toward him and another, and the dark metal veins in the floor answered her, hummed up through the soles of her plain leather boots into her ankles, into her knees. Did your aunt tell you the sword was broken? Or did she give you the sword already broken? He went the color of old paper. The wooden box on the table, the box with the dark metal bands, gave a single, small, terrible click, the way a lock clicks when it has been waiting a long time to open. And from the corridor outside, very faintly, very far away, Ivenna heard the sound of a woman beginning to laugh. The laughter stopped before Corin reached the door. He moved faster than Ivenna had thought a man his size could move, was across the chamber and through the door in 3 strides. And she heard his boots strike the corridor stones in a rhythm that became, between one breath and the next, the 4-footed gallop of a wolf. The sound faded toward the south stair. She stood alone in the chamber with the wooden box on the table. It clicked again. Ivenna did not think. She crossed to the table and laid her hands flat on the lid, and the dark metal bands warmed under her palms. But this was different. This was the whole castle leaning in to listen. The lid lifted of its own accord. Vale Korath lay inside on a bed of black velvet. Whole. Or the shape of whole. Some hand had welded the 2 halves together at the break, ground the seam smooth, polished the steel until it gleamed, and done it badly. The seam was flat. There was no rune at the break point at all. The dark steel that had whispered to her for 27 nights had gone silent. Killed, Marith had said. A killed rune. But Marith had lied about the killing. Marith had done the killing herself. Ivenna's hands were shaking. She made them stop. She lifted the blade out of the box. It was lighter than it should have been, the wrongness of it like cold water against her skin, and she carried it across the chamber to the hearth and laid it on the stones. She had no anvil, no hammer, no fire hot enough. She had her hands. She had the bloodline that had slept in her family for 11 generations and had begun, somewhere between the burning of her forge and the climb of the mirror tower, to wake. She knelt beside the blade and pressed her right palm flat against the false seam. For one terrible moment, nothing. Then the steel screamed. It was not a sound she heard with her ears. It was a sound she heard with her bones, with the small hollow places behind her teeth. The blade screamed, and Ivenna saw, behind her eyes, every hand that had ever touched this sword. The first king who had carried it, the smith of the first forge who had hammered it. The night, 3 months ago, when a woman with hair the color of dried blood had stood over it in a vault beneath this very castle and laid a single drop of something black on the place where the rune had lived and unmade it. Not broken, unmade. Ivenna gasped and pulled her hand back. Her palm was smoking. My lady, Mistress Pell, in the doorway, her face the color of ash. My lady, your hand. Get me a hammer. A hammer, Mistress Pell, the smallest you can find, and a chisel, and a pail of cold water. Now. The older woman ran. Ivenna sat back on her heels and looked at her smoking palm. The skin was unbroken. There was no pain. There was, instead, a feeling like a door opening in a room she had not known had a door. The dark metal in the floor was singing now, not humming, singing. The whole castle was singing. She pressed both hands flat to the stone and closed her eyes. Show me, she said. Not aloud, not in any tongue she had been taught, but in the older language her grandmother had whispered into her hair when she was small. Show me what she did. And the castle showed her. A vault 3 floors beneath the throne room. A door of dark metal that opened only to a Verillis hand. The blade laid on a black stone table. Marith Verillis with her sleeves rolled to her elbows and a small glass vial in her steady hand. The drop of black liquid. The whisper of 3 words in a tongue that should have been dead 1,000 years. And then, Ivenna saw what she had not been meant to see. The vial had not been Marith's. A second hand, a man's hand, gloved in pale leather, had passed it to her across the black stone table. Ivenna could not see his face. She could see the cuff of his sleeve, dark green, embroidered in silver thread with a sigil she had never seen before. 3 crossed arrows, bound at the center with a circle. The sigil of someone who dined, Marith had said, at the king's right hand. Mistress Pell came back at a run with a hammer and a chisel. Ivenna opened her eyes. Set them down, she said, and then go find the king. Find him now. Tell him. She stopped. Outside the window, very far away, a wolf had begun to howl. Then a second. Then a dozen. The howling came from the southern wall, and it was not the lonely howl of the king she had heard from her tower window. This was a hunting cry. Wolves who had found something. Or wolves who had been let find something. Ivenna's blood went cold. Tell him, she said, that his aunt has not run. Tell him she has gone to whoever stands at his right hand. Tell him to stop chasing her and come back. The chamber door slammed open. Captain Belesh stood there with his sword drawn, his face streaked with blood that was not his own. 2 of his men braced behind him. My lady, he said, and his voice was raw. The south wall has been breached. We have wolves in the courtyard who do not belong to this house. The king is cut off in the kennel yard. You must come with me. Where? Anywhere. Anywhere in this castle is no longer safe. Ivenna looked at the blade on the hearthstones, at the hammer and chisel on the floor, at her smoking palm. No, she said, there is one place that is safe. Take me to the vault beneath the throne room, the one with the dark metal door. The captain's face went still. My lady, that vault is sealed. It opens only to a Verillis hand. I know. Then it will not open for you. Ivenna picked up the hammer in one hand and the chisel in the other and the broken sword across her forearms, and she stood up, and the dark metal veins in the floor of Caer Velmoran lit beneath her boots, like coals waking under a bellows. It will open for me, she said. And it did. Captain Belesh had served 3 kings and seen perhaps 20 things in his life that no living man could explain. He had never, until that morning, seen a door of dark Verillis metal open to a hand that was not Verillis. It opened for Ivenna the way a flower opens to the sun. She walked through it without looking back. The captain followed her, his sword still drawn, his men at his shoulders. The corridor beyond was lit by no torch. The dark metal in the walls gave light. A pale, steady blue that cast no shadow. And the air was warmer than it had any right to be, 3 floors beneath a winter castle. "My lady," the captain said, and his hard voice was not hard. "I have served this house for 18 years. I did not know this place." "No one knew this place," Ivenna said. "That is the point." The corridor opened into a circular chamber. She had seen it already, in the vision. The black stone table at the center. The walls lined with niches, each one holding a thing: a circlet, a dagger, a bone flute, a folded gray cloth. That she did not recognize, but that her hands, somehow, did. She walked past them all and laid Veilcarath on the black stone, set the hammer beside it, and the chisel, and turned to Captain Belesh. "I need you," she said, "to do exactly what I tell you. Hold your sword between me and the door. If anything that is not the king comes through it, kill it, even if it speaks, even if it begs, especially if it begs." Captain Belesh did not waste words. "Yes, my lady." She turned back to the blade. The wrongness of the welded seam was worse here. In the singing light of the dark metal, the false weld looked like a scar on a child's face. Ivenna laid her left palm flat against the seam, and her right hand around the hilt, and she closed her eyes, and she did the only thing her grandmother had ever made her promise to do if the moment came. She listened. The blade had no rune now. The rune was unmade. But the place where the rune had lived still remembered. That place had the shape of the rune the way a riverbed has the shape of a river even in the dry season. Ivenna pressed her palm to the dry riverbed in the steel and let her bloodline pour into it. Heat rose in the metal. Not the heat of a forge, the heat of a living body. She lifted the chisel. She set its point against the false seam. She lifted the hammer. She struck. The sound it made was not the sound of metal. It was the sound of a held breath finally released. The false weld split along the seam, not crookedly, not crudely, but cleanly, as though the blade itself had been waiting for permission to come apart again. The 2 halves lay on the black stone once more. Ivenna set down the hammer. She picked up the 2 halves, one in each hand. She held them together, point to hilt, the break edges kissing, and she pressed her thumb, hard, into the soft place at the base of her own throat, where the pulse beat closest to the skin. Blood welled under her thumb. She drew it across the break. The dark steel drank it. The rune woke. It woke not blue this time, but a color Ivenna had no name for. A color that lived in the corner of the eye and would not stay still. It woke along the entire length of the blade, not only at the break, and as it woke, every other rune on Veilcarath that had ever been struck into its steel woke with it. The blade lifted, just slightly, from her palms. It hung in the air a finger's breadth above her hands. It was, for one long moment, no longer a sword. It was a promise in the shape of a sword. Ivenna closed her bleeding hand around the hilt. Behind her, Captain Belesh made a sound that was not a word. Behind him, in the corridor, footsteps were coming. Many footsteps. Running. The first figure through the door was a man Ivenna had never seen. He wore a dark green cloak. The cuff was embroidered in silver thread, with 3 crossed arrows bound at the center with a circle. He saw her. He saw the blade. He saw the rune. His face did a thing that Ivenna would remember for the rest of her life. A small, private, appalled thing. The look of a man who has just understood that the careful building of years has fallen down in the space of an afternoon. "Lord Senar," Captain Belesh said softly, "I had so hoped it would not be you." Lord Senar did not answer the captain. He looked at Ivenna, and his face rearranged itself into something almost gentle, and he said, "Smith, listen to me. Whatever Marith has told you, she has told you to use you. Whatever the king has told you, he has told you to keep you. I am the only man in this castle who has ever meant to set you free. Put down the blade and walk out with me, and you will be on the southern road by nightfall." The blade in Ivena's hand grew warm. The dark metal in the floor sang. She thought of her forge, of the column of smoke against the morning sky, of 41 days behind a barred window, of Mistress Pell saying he has been waiting for you to ask, of the wax figure's smile in the mirror tower, of a gloved hand passing a vial across a black stone table. "My lord," she said, and her voice was perfectly steady, "I do not need any man in this castle to set me free. I am the only one here who was never locked." Captain Belesh moved. His sword took Lord Senar across the wrist of his sword hand before the lord had even drawn. The gloved hand fell to the floor, still holding a small glass vial it had been about to break. And Senar was on his knees screaming, and the captain's men were on him, and the vault door, behind them all, slammed shut of its own accord, sealing the corridor outside. Ivenna stood at the black stone table with Valkarath whole in her bleeding hand, and she understood, finally, what it meant to be the last living smith of the first forge. The castle would let her out of this vault when she was ready to leave it. No one else could come in. And somewhere on the other side of that sealed door, the king was fighting alone. She turned to Captain Belesh. "Tell your men to hold this room," she said. "Tell them not to open this door for anyone but me. I am going to find the king." "My lady, there is no door out of this vault but the one we came through." Ivenna smiled. It was a smith's smile, the kind a smith uses when she knows a thing about iron that the man across from her does not. "Captain," she said, "this castle was built by my blood. There is always another door." She turned to the wall behind the black stone table. The wall with no niche, no carving, no seam. And she laid her bleeding palm flat against the dark metal veining the stone. The wall opened. The passage behind the wall was narrow and old, and lit by the same dark metal blue as the vault. It climbed. Ivenna climbed with it. The blade in her hand grew warmer with each turn of the stair, as though it knew where it was going better than she did. Her bleeding palm had stopped bleeding. The cut had closed without scarring, and where the blood had run down the inside of her wrist there was now a thin line of the same dark metal that hummed in the walls. A vein of it, sunk into her skin, as though her body had begun to remember what it was made of. She did not stop to look at it. The stair ended at a stone the size of her shoulders. She pressed her palm flat to it. The stone slid sideways. She stepped through into cold air and the smell of horses and blood, and she understood after a stunned heartbeat that she had come up through the floor of the kennel yard. The kennel yard was a slaughterhouse. There were perhaps 30 wolves down, some belonging to the house, some not. There were perhaps a dozen men down. Torches burned in the snow. The air smelled of iron and wet fur and a sweet underneath that she did not let her mind name. In the center of the yard, ringed by 4 wolves that did not belong to the house, was a single great black wolf with copper eyes. He was bleeding from his shoulder, his flank, his throat. He was on 3 legs. The 4th, the right foreleg, hung the way a leg hangs when a bone in it has gone where bones should not go. The 4 ringing wolves were circling him in the slow, patient pattern of hunters who knew the kill was a matter of time. Ivenna walked into the yard. She did not run. She did not shout. She walked with Valkarath bare in her right hand, and the rune along its blade burning the color that was not quite blue, and the dark metal veins in the courtyard stones lit beneath her boots one by one as she crossed them, a path of cold blue fire opening toward the wolf in the center of the ring. The 4 hunting wolves turned. They saw her. They saw the blade. One of them, the smallest, the one nearest to her, flinched. Its hackles dropped, its tail tucked. Its yellow eyes went wide and white-rimmed, and it backed away from her one slow step at a time, without ever taking those eyes off the rune. The other 3 were braver, or stupider. They came at her together. She did not know how to use a sword. She had made hundreds of them. She had never, in 23 years, drawn one in anger. The blade did not seem to care. Valkarath moved in her hand, the way water moves in a riverbed, the way a song moves through a singer. With every smith who had ever shaped it, and every king who had ever carried it, and the 11 generations of her own bloodline that had been quiet for so long. The first wolf came in low. The blade rose. The wolf fell in 2 pieces in the snow, and she had not, herself, been able to follow how. The second came in high. She turned half a step, and the blade was where the wolf's throat needed it to be. The third did not finish its leap. It broke off mid-air and ran for the southern wall, and the small flinching one ran after it, and the courtyard was suddenly very, very quiet. The black wolf in the center of the ring sank slowly onto his side in the bloodied snow. Ivenna ran to him. She dropped to her knees. The blade went into the snow point first beside her and stood, and the rune kept burning. She put her hands on the great black head. Copper eyes that were almost closed found her face. There was no recognition in them. There was, instead, a fading. "Corin," she said. "Corin, look at me, look at me." He could not shift back. She saw it in the set of his ears, in the rasp of his breathing. The wolf had taken him too far. The wounds were too many. The body knew it was dying and would not let go of the form most likely to keep fighting. She had no healing magic. Whatever her bloodline was, it was not that. She had only the blade, and the castle, and the dark metal that had begun, sometime in the last hour, to live in her own veins. She laid her left palm flat against the black wolf's chest, over the place where his heart was working too slowly. She laid her right palm on the hilt of Valkarath standing in the snow. She closed her eyes. She did not pray. She did not beg. She connected, the way a smith connects 2 pieces of metal, and let everything the castle had poured into her since she had walked into Caer Velmaran pour, in one long, unbroken line, through her, into him. The dark metal in the courtyard stones went white beneath her knees. The black wolf shuddered. His broken foreleg straightened. The wound at his throat stopped bleeding. The slow heart under her palm sped, steadied, became the hammering thing she had felt the first time he had stepped into her forge. His eyes opened. He looked at her. And he was a wolf no longer. He was a man on his knees in the snow with his hands fisted in the front of her gray wool dress and his forehead pressed to her shoulder, and he was shaking so hard she could feel it in her own bones, and he was saying, into the wool over her collarbone, the same word over and over again, in a voice that was not a king's voice and never had been. "Ivenna, Ivenna, Ivenna." She held him. She held the Alpha King of the Northern Crown in the bloodied snow of his own kennel yard, and she felt the dark metal vein in her wrist warm against the back of his neck. And she knew, not guessed, knew, the way a smith knows true iron from false, that this man had not, in any meaningful sense, been free since the day his sword had broken. That the woman who had broken it was still inside this castle and was not finished. And that she herself was no longer trying to leave Caer Velmaran. She was going to take it back. For him. With him. And the kingdom was going to learn before the next moon rose that the bloodline of the first forge had only been sleeping. Above them, very far up, in the highest tower of the castle, every mirror in a certain round room cracked at the same instant, from the center outward, in the shape of a rune that should not have been able to wake. She did not let him stand alone. Corin tried. He was a king, and a wolf, and a man who had spent his whole life being the one who carried others. But his right leg, the one that had been broken in wolf form, gave under him the moment he tried to put weight on it. Ivenna caught him under the arm. He was twice her weight, and almost a head taller, and she held him anyway, because she had hammered iron for 16 years and her shoulders knew how to bear what they had to bear. "The tower," he rasped against her hair. "Ivenna, the tower. I know. My aunt. I know who she is. I know what she did to your sword. I know who passed her the vial. Lord Senar is in the vault, alive, with a hand he no longer owns, and Captain Balesh has him. He pulled back enough to look at her. His copper eyes, this close, were the color of a forge, at the moment the metal was ready. There was blood drying in the scar at his jaw. There was something else in his face, too. Something raw, and unshielded, and almost frightened. And she understood, with a small jolt that traveled the length of her spine, that he was frightened of her. Not of what she could do, of what she now was. "You opened the vault," he whispered. "I did." "You woke the rune." "Yes." "You walked into a courtyard of strange wolves with a blade you did not know how to hold, and you came out the other side, and you put your hand on me, and I—" His voice broke. He did not try to hide that it broke. "Ivenna, I was already going. I would not have come back. You reached into me and brought me back, and I do not know what to do with what you are." She reached up. She laid her hand against the side of his face, over the scar, and his whole body went still. "You are going to stand up," she said quietly, "and put your weight on me, and we are going to climb a tower I was already climbing without you. Then you are going to do what kings do. You are going to bring justice down. I will hold the blade for you. I will hold you for you if I have to. But you do not get to be afraid of me, Corin Virilis. Today I need you steady." He stared at her. Then, for the first time since she had seen him, he laughed. It was a broken sound, half a sob, but it was a laugh. He turned his face into her palm and pressed his mouth to the inside of her wrist, just above the dark vein where the metal had begun to live in her skin. And the touch of his lips was so brief and so reverent that Ivenna felt something inside her chest that she had been holding shut for 42 days come open, the way a forge door opens to the heat. "Lead then," he said, "smith of the first forge. Lead." She lifted Valkarath out of the snow. They walked together into Caer Velmaran. The castle was theirs. The veins in the stone did not only sing now, they lit, ahead of her, a path of cold blue fire that opened through corridor after corridor and closed again behind her, sealing each passage as she left it. Doors opened before she reached them, doors closed before any pursuer could follow. The servants she passed pressed themselves against the walls and dropped to their knees, and Mistress Pell came running out of an alcove on the third landing with a clean cloth and pressed it into Ivenna's bloodied hand and said only, "The northwest stair, my lady. She has gone up," and vanished again the way a woman vanishes who has spent 30 years learning when not to be seen. The northwest stair was the one behind the tapestry. Ivenna climbed it with Corin's arm across her shoulders. He could walk now. The leg was holding. But she did not let him take his weight off her, because the thing waking in her wrist was warmest where her skin touched his, and she could feel more of his strength coming back with every touch. Forge magic. Smith magic. The oldest magic in the Seven Valleys, and the one no Virilis aunt had thought to be afraid of, because it had been sleeping for 11 generations. It was not sleeping anymore. They reached the pale wood door at the top of the stair. It was already open. Marith Virilis was waiting for them in the round room. The mirrors were all cracked. Every one of them had broken in the same instant in the same shape. A rune repeating 100 times on every shattered surface. The fire in the hearth had gone out. The air smelled of cold metal and a faint, wrong sweetness, and Marith herself stood at the window with her back to them. She did not turn. "Corin," she said, conversational, "you should not have come up. I would have come down in a little while. I had a few things to finish first." "Aunt!" His voice was a king's again, but underneath the king there was a nephew, and the nephew was a boy, and the boy was a heartbreak. "Why?" "Because your father should never have been king. Because his father should never have been king. Because the line of Virilis took this castle from a smith house 11 generations ago and pretended the smith house had died, and I have spent 31 years walking the halls of a stolen home." She turned now. Her face was the same wax figure beauty, but the wax had begun to crack. Fine lines through the skin around her eyes and mouth, the way the mirrors had cracked. I was going to give it back, Corin, to the Smith house, to her. I needed your sword broken. I needed her here. I needed her blood on the rune, and you out of the way for the small space of one moon, and the kingdom would have woken to its proper queen and forgotten you in a season. Senner agreed. His family had its own grievance. It was clean. You burned her forge, Corin said. I did not burn her forge. You burned her forge. I only had to mention her, and you, proud, frightened, hungry boy that you are, you sent the warrant. You sent the captain. You did the cruel thing for me, and I did not even have to ask. She smiled the wax smile. That is what you are for, nephew. That is what your line has always been for. The cruelty that the Smith house was too gentle to do for itself. Ivenna stepped forward. You wanted me on the throne, she said. Yes. You broke a sword that has been in this kingdom for 1,000 years. You let strange wolves into the courtyard. You almost killed your nephew in his own kennel yard. You almost killed me, twice by my count. And you did all of it because you wanted to hand me a crown I never asked for. I did it, Marith said, because the Smith house should have had the crown, because I am the last living person in this castle who remembers what was taken. I did it for you, Ivenna Thrace, whether you have the wit to thank me or not. Ivenna lifted Vel'Karath. The rune along its blade was burning the color that was not blue, and the dark metal in the floor under her boots was burning the same color, and Marith, for the first time, looked at the blade, and at Ivenna's wrist, and at the small dark vein that lived now in her skin, and the wax smile flickered. You woke it, Marith breathed. You, child, you woke the whole of it. I am not your queen, Marith Verilis. Ivenna, I am not your anything. You did not free me. You used me. You burned my home through a hand that thought it was acting on its own. You almost killed the only man in this castle who has ever asked me, even once, what I wanted. Her voice did not shake. You did all of it without asking me a single question. You did it the way every Verelis has done every cruel thing in this castle for 11 generations. For my own good. Marith's face went pale. And the Smith house, Ivenna said, does not do things for people's own good. The Smith house asks. She lowered the blade. Marith stared at her. You will not strike me, Marith whispered. No, I will not strike you. The blade is not for that. The blade is for the rune, and the rune is awake, and the rune knows what you did to it. She laid the flat of Vel'Karath against the dark metal vein in her own wrist. The rune unmade itself. It did not fade. It did not dim. It poured itself in one long, unbroken line of cold blue fire, out of the blade and through her wrist into the floor, and through the floor into the walls. And every dark metal vein in Caer Velmaran lit at once, a great bright net of fire running through every stone of the castle from the highest tower to the deepest vault. And all of it converged, in a single bright and terrible point, on the woman standing by the broken mirrors. Marith Verilis did not scream. She had time, perhaps, to look surprised. Then the dark metal in the floor of her own tower took her, not killed her, not in any way Ivenna could see, but took her, the way a forge takes a piece of metal that has been worked too long and folds it back into the bar. And the round room was empty of her, between one heartbeat and the next, with no body and no blood and no sound. Only a faint warmth in the floor where she had been standing. The blade in Ivenna's hand went cool. The rune, on its steel, was gone. She had known, when she laid the flat of the blade against her wrist, that the rune would not survive what she was asking it to do. She had known what she was spending. Vel'Karath was, again, only a sword. A very old, very fine, very ordinary sword. It was enough. It would always have been enough. She turned to Corin. He was staring at her with a face she did not know how to read. "Ivenna," he said softly, "the rune was mine to spend. The Smith house woke it. The Smith house unmade it. The kingdom does not need a sword that breaks the world. The kingdom needs a king who deserves the one he carries. You will have to deserve it without the rune. I will have to deserve me without it. And we will, I think." Her voice almost broke then. She did not let it. "We will do better work without something that old asking us to be larger than we are." He crossed the cracked mirror room. He did not ask permission this time. He took her face in both his hands, and he pressed his forehead to hers. And he did not kiss her. He was, she understood, a man who had only just been given back his life, and did not yet trust himself with anyone else's. He only stood there, his forehead against hers, breathing her in, and the dark metal vein in her wrist hummed against the underside of his jaw, and the cracked mirrors all around them did not show their reflection at all. "Stay," he said. The single word. Quiet. Not a king's word. A man's. "Ivenna. Stay." She closed her eyes. "I was never going to leave," she said. "Not once you asked." In the spring, the forge of Caer Velmoran reopened for the first time in 11 generations. It had always been there. Ivenna had not known, until Mistress Pell led her to it on the third morning after the tower, that the great forge of the castle had been sealed since the Smith house had fallen. The doors had been mortared shut. The chimneys had been bricked over. A ballroom had been built across its entrance. 3 kings had walked over its anvil without ever knowing the anvil was beneath their feet. Corin opened it himself, in the end, not with hammer and chisel, with his hands. He stood in the ballroom and laid both palms flat against the false wall and said, in the rough voice that was only ever his when he was speaking to her, "I have been a poor steward of my own house. Open, please." And the wall opened, because the castle had been waiting a long time for any Virilis to ask. The forge inside was untouched. Cold. 11 generations cold, but untouched. The anvil was twice the size of her father's. The hammers hung in their racks the way hammers hang when someone has put them down, meaning to come back tomorrow. She walked to the anvil. She laid her hand on it. It warmed. She wept then, for the first time since the morning her forge had burned, and she let Corin hold her while she did it, and she did not feel small in his arms, and she did not feel kept. The trials came in the summer. Lord Senar lost his head before the assembled houses, and his family lost its lands, and the gloved vial that had unmade a rune was dropped, by Ivenna's own hand, into the deepest fire of the reopened forge. It did not burn, it melted. The forge took it the way the floor of the mirror tower had taken Marith Verilis, and Ivenna did not ask where either of them had gone, because there are some questions a smith does not ask, and she was, finally, learning which ones. The kingdom was told a great deal of the truth and a careful amount of the rest, that the Smith house had returned, that the dark metal of Caer Velmoran had woken to its own bloodline, that the king had, for 42 days the previous winter, kept the smith of Caedmon Hollow against her will in his castle, and had, on the morning of the 43rd day, asked her, not commanded her, asked her, to stay. The kingdom was not told that she had said yes in a tower of broken mirrors with her forehead pressed to his. That part was theirs. They were married in the autumn, in the open courtyard where she had carried him out of his wolf form, on the day the first frost came. She wore gray wool, he wore plain dark linen. There was no crown on her head. She had refused it, and he had not argued, because he was learning that asking and accepting a no were the same skill. And there was a small dark metal ring on her finger that she had hammered herself in the reopened forge, and an identical one on his. The ring on his finger was the only thing Velkarath had ever made other than itself. She had taken a sliver of its dark steel, no more than a paring's worth, and folded it again and again at the anvil until it was no longer steel but something older, and she had set it in the band on his hand, the way the rune had been set in the blade. Not a rune of unmaking, a rune of staying. It glowed, very faintly, when he was in the same room as her. It did not glow at all when he was not. He had not, in the year that followed, left her side long enough for her to find out how far the ring would let him go. In the 5th year of her reign, for she was eventually talked into a smaller word than queen, a word the Smith house preferred, warden. Evenna Thrace bore a child in the room above the reopened forge, with the sound of the hammers below her, and the dark metal veins of Caer Velmorin lit, every one of them, in the moment of the child's first cry. The child was a girl. The girl had her father's copper eyes and her mother's smith's hands, and when Mistress Pell, old now, but still in her grey dress, laid the child against Evenna's chest, the small fingers closed around the dark vein in Evenna's wrist, as though they had been waiting their whole short life to find it. Corin sank to his knees beside the bed. He did not speak. He laid his forehead against Evenna's shoulder, the way he had laid it against her in the cracked mirror room, and she felt him shake the way he had shaken in the bloodied snow, and she stroked his ash-colored hair and said quietly, the only thing left to say, "You see, we did better without it. We did our own work." He nodded against her shoulder. He could not, just then, do anything else. Outside the window, the forge fire was burning. The hammers were ringing. The dark metal in the walls of Caer Velmorin was singing the song it had been waiting 11 generations to sing, and the song was, for the first time in any of those generations, a song 2 voices were carrying together. A king's voice, a smith's voice. The kingdom, in the years that followed, would tell the story many ways. Some would say it was the story of a king who took a smith from her forge and would not let her leave his castle. Some would say it was the story of a smith who walked into a king's castle and would not be kept in any tower. The truth, as Evenna Thrace told it to her daughter on long winter evenings beside the great anvil, was simpler than either, and harder, and better. It was the story of 2 people who had each been locked in their own life for a long time, and who had between them asked, and been answered, and built, with their own 4 hands, the door. And once the door was open, neither of them ever needed to walk through it again. They were already, both of them, home.